commons, the finance, the trust, as key enablers, not only to implement the pact at the local level, but to transform the international power landscape.
So a shared vulnerability, a shared opportunity to take risks is one way, as Emilia said, to rebuild those relationships and take down some of those power dynamics.
Question again the basics of economy and finance.
And I think that's the real shift that I've seen in the last 10 years. We didn't have a discourse that was dealing about caring, sharing, solidarity, feminist politics.
There will be no human rights or social justice. There will be no right to the city or democracy without the commons.
We're talking about changing the power of me to the power of we.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Jose Alvarez, and I'm happy to welcome you all to the fourth session, the final one of the first batch of the future envisioning exercises. Some of you have already participated during the past weeks and yesterday in the exercises on reclaiming the commons, redefining economy and finance, and rebuilding trust. But for the rest of you who are joining us today for the first time, and this is the first exercise of this kind for you, allow me to take you all through the process that we've been going through to make sure we're all on the same page. The future envisioning exercises mandated by the UCLG policy councils are a mechanism to unfold the pact for the future. They're a space of dialogue and co-creation in which the UCLG political leadership, together with organized civil society and partners articulated in the UCLG town halls, aim to build bridges to unfold the pact. The conclusions reached in these discussions will inform the deliberation of UCLG statutory bodies, as well as our contributions to the UN General Assembly's revision of the 2030 Agenda and the SDG Summit, as well as to the Summit of the Future, building on the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda. During this session, and in the process of co-creation that will follow, we will try to explore the importance of renewing governance, and especially looking at which are the challenges that we face when rethinking the current governance architecture, how the new governance architecture needs to take shape, and what the global decision-making table looks like for all actors. We believe that a renewed governance architecture is needed to deliver on the transformations and the commitments contained in the Pact for the Future and the UN Common Agenda. So the agenda for today's session is as follows. We will start by setting the scene from the UCLG World Secretariat, followed by a consultation on the transformation of the governance architecture through Mentimeter, in which we will invite you to participate with either your mobile phones, your tablets, or your computers by accessing menti.com and entering the code below, which is 7591-6409. We will then have two entry point speeches addressing multilateral reform and the role of local and regional governments and other stakeholders in the renewed governance that we want. And this will be followed by four contributions from policy councillors, town halls, and other stakeholders on what this transformation needs to look like. We will also discover in our In Focus segment a partner process to discuss the experiences of the African Center for the Constructive Resolution of Disputes in Conflict Resolution, before moving on to the Agora, the open dialogue space that is the heart of this exercise, in which we invite you to take part. So with all of this said, I hope this wasn't too long. I thank you once again for your participation, and I'm pleased to give off the floor to our Secretary General, Emilia Said, to kick off the session. So please, Emilia.
Thank you very much, Jose, and welcome everyone to this exciting discussion on governance. And I say this exciting because what we are trying to do here is to put our usual conversations around governance, multi-level governance that we all know about are so relevant for our global movement under a different light. What the Pact for Government and Democracy calls for in our Pact for the Future is redefining governing in partnership, placing citizens and communities at the core of decision making, and with this in mind, also influencing the international architecture. And all of this not only because everybody needs to be at the table when decisions are going to be affecting everybody, so not only because of that legitimacy, but also because we want different things to be decided upon. We want different investments, we want different policies. And the only way to achieve this is if we also change the way that we govern each other and who we involve. And here is where our agenda at the local and territorial level connects with the global agenda. In a world that is as intertwined as ours, where everything we do has implications somewhere else, and where implications internationally also touch upon the daily life of communities, localization needs to be put in a different space, and it is unthinkable to be able to deliver for local communities if you don't have a global vision. And this is why our Pact for the Future gives opinions on the kinds of competencies that local and regional governments need to have at their level, but also gives opinions about issues that right now are not in the competencies of local and regional governments, and we might not even want them to be. But local and regional governments and their communities do have an opinion on it, and there needs to be a way in which we can influence decision making at the right level. This is why governing in partnership is so relevant for us. We have this discussion then articulated around this notion of localization, which is not the mere implementation of the global agendas at local level, but is much more, is shaping those global agendas. And I am particularly proud to say that today's session is built in partnership and as a contribution from UCLG to the local 2030 initiative of the United Nations. We will talk more about that initiative later on. But we do it also in a context, and we had a discussion which was very interesting yesterday, that there is a lack of trust between citizens and institutions, and we need to guarantee that we regain that trust, that we reshape that trust, that trust serves also, and the questioning of the trust, as was discussed yesterday, serves to give democracy new tools. We need literally to give new tools to democracy, or as the Pact says, retooling democracies and these citizenships to actually contribute to the reforms that we need, the reforms of the systems, of the food systems, of the education system, of the health system, of the economic system. It is an ambitious endeavor, but the moment is probably now, and the window of opportunity to actually do this, not from a place of only crisis, but from a place of vision and hope, is here and now. And we think that the people that we have around the table today and the people that you represent are the right actors to have this discussion. We're going to try to connect the international with the local decision making, and we will need to try and challenge ourselves to a new type of governance, but also a new type of accountability. So this is the framing of the exercise. With this discussion, what we are trying to do is also influence the agenda of our World Organization in two separate manners. One, the agenda of the global organization, the type of commitments that we need to make, and the type of discussions that we will need to facilitate among our political leadership, because we are well aware we will not all agree on everything. I mean, transformation is only possible when different perspectives are put to work, and that will define the agenda of our policy councils, which are decision-making mechanisms for deliberation as well in our World Organization. And then the second part is we will try to shape those things that we agree on concrete actions, concrete policy recommendations that our membership will be encouraged to pursue, and hopefully also our partners at civil society level and other stakeholders. So this is the frame. It is ambitious. It's not going to be a one-off. It's not the only conversation we are going to have, and we need to connect it with other topics on the agenda that were introduced by Jose. But I hope this encourages us to have as an honest discussion, as honest as possible, as bold as possible, and as hopeful as possible. So wonderful to have you here. And now it's time to take the polls, as I always say. Let us see what you think, what you feel. Before hearing others talk, let us have your opinion. And I am delighted to invite my colleague Cecile to run us through the Mentimeter exercise for an interactive consultation live right now. Cecile, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emilia, and good afternoon, everyone. It is so nice to start this conversation on governance by sharing our thoughts and experiences, and so we can renew governance together. So as you just said, just as we did during the previous exercises, we want to kickstart this conversation with a moment of interaction, and we will do this through Mentimeter. And so you have the instructions already in the chat in English, Spanish, and French, and also on the screen. And so we invite you to open the webpage menti.com. And you will be asked a code, and it's 75916409. So just saying it again, 75916409. And everyone is invited to participate. And so I already see that some of you are already answering. But the first question then is, in one word, how would you describe the current multilateral system based on your experience, your point of view? It's so we can collect a general picture of our position today. And so I think what comes first is like mostly negative, like outdated, inefficient, but we also see bottom up, which is a very good sign of where we want to go, and we will go back to this later. We can also see broken and balanced. We'll go to what we want and what we need in the next questions.
Yeah, and I think if I read this, I mean this is a snapshot, of course, and there are different moments. If we would have asked this during the peak of the pandemic, by the way, the pandemic is officially over now, according to the World Health Organization. But if we would have asked that same question during the pandemic, I think we would have been a bit more positive about it, because we all put a lot of hope, in this World Health Organization that was taking the reins and trying to save us from the impact of the virus. Of course, the moment now is different. We have new wars emerging. We see what is happening in Ukraine, but also what is happening in Sudan and in Yemen, and it's really a moment for renewal. And I think what I can read here, Cecile, is a reflection of that when we say it's broken, it's inefficient, because let us remember where the United Nations come from. It's an effort of peace, and we are not managing to avoid war. So I think we need to read it a bit like this. And the bottom-up remark is the only one that gives me hope, but I am wondering whether we made a mistake there, and I think what we meant was top-down, quite frankly. But who knows? It might be a sign of hope that we are giving. Cecile, let us go to the next question.
Yeah, sure. And now that we mapped a little bit our expectatives, let's go to a more perspective and like future-oriented question. And we would like you to describe in like just a few words what are the transformations that you think we need in the international governance architecture to address global challenges. And you can send a few ideas one after another. And these global challenges, they can be crises, they can be emergencies, they can be structural problems of governance. So yeah, let's see what comes first. Network system, that is what we need, like multi-level, multi-stakeholder, everyone in collaboration. We also see coherence in policy, cooperation, transparency, very important as well, and it echoes very much what we discussed yesterday, democracy as well, on trust.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting also. these Listen to Cities and indigenous peoples show that we would need to change the people that are having the conversation and making the decisions. So it's about different stakeholders. I think this is very strong. But I also really like to see the issue of democracy and transparency and moving away from consensus in this discussion. Because if we want to have a serious discussion about the future role of a multilateral system, we will need to take some decisions where not every single stakeholder agrees, and we need to move forward. So I think a democratic architecture will be extremely critical. Overcome border-centered approaches is one of the issues that also shows that we need to change the stakeholders, because if you are negotiating only with member states and with national governments, then the border issue becomes very relevant. So yeah, very interesting feedback indeed. Cecile, anything else that you have picked up on this one?
I picked up the one on the diverse sources of leadership, and I think rethinking leadership, rethinking the exercise of power really goes hand in hand in rethinking the way we govern ourselves. Like, it's different scales, different spheres, but ultimately it all links to the same way of like rethinking the way we collaborate, we co-create our future based on our interdependencies. And yeah, I think it's also
the exercises we are proposing is also far-reaching. I really like this rethinking leadership is very interesting indeed. We have seen during the commons debate that we were also rethinking what are the commons and having a broader view of what we define a common good. But also yesterday, for instance, we saw how participants were claiming to redefine skills. Who has the skills? Redefine knowledge. I think is a very important part of the discussion, questioning all of these things. We have a third question, right, Cecile?
Yes. So now we would like you to suggest a concrete change at the international level to ensure local and regional governments and local communities are considered in the multilateral system, and so that we can bring about, like, we can bring the transformations we need from the bottom up. So we hear you. Like, any ideas, concrete ways to go forward would be very important for us to integrate in the recommendations we will draw from these conversations. So we see a voice in the UN system, and it needs to be a voice that is included in a systematic way, institutionalized, not just a punctual ad hoc seat at some tables, but everywhere. We also see listening exercises. Listening is, I think, a super good exercise, and we still need to think how to engage with this in a more inclusive way, and really think about the active role of listening. We also see reforms in the international systems, direct representation at the UNGA, the General Assembly of the United Nations, organized constituencies. This is what we are driving, involving local governments in decision-making process. This is exactly it.
Yeah.
I don't know, Emilia, if you see anything, a global
system. I think this is going to link really well with the presentations that are coming up. But just a thought that I wanted to leave to the group is that very often when we try to justify or to give arguments about how important it is to involve local and regional governments, but also communities. I mean, talking local and regional governments because that is the constituency that we represent directly. But usually member states and even the United Nations system looks at us like we want to gain political spaces for political leaderships at local level, which I think is totally legitimate and it should be a good reason, a good enough reason. But that is not the only reason. I think that what we need to focus on is how to expand the agenda of the multilateral system and to create a true ownership of that agenda that communities and societies as a whole can identify with, and that is the reasoning behind it. So I really like many of the ideas, and the part of the discussion around the UN reform that we want to focus on is not only democratizing the system, which is important and relevant itself, but also democratizing it to ensure that it truly reflects what people are worried about, what communities need, the kind of world that we want to live in. So this link between the local and the global is very critical for us. And I'm very happy to see many of the feedback that we are getting here, but I think we will need to articulate more responses around this. So thank you very much, Cecile, for the exercise. And let us go now to the next segment of our envisioning exercise today. We call it the segment is the entry points. We want to give perspective on why we are having this discussion, and we have two wonderful speakers and very important partners for us. I'm delighted to have with us Daniel Perel and Pefi Kingi. Daniel, who is going to take the floor first, is the co-chair of the Coalition for the UN We Need, and it is within the framework of that coalition that I have seen, followed, and sometimes contributed to very, very, very interesting conversations about the multilateral systems. If you want to find true multilateralists, you need to go and follow the work of this coalition. So you cannot imagine how happy I am that we have Daniel with us. You go first, and then I will introduce our friend Pefi Kingi. Daniel, welcome, and thank you very much for doing this exercise with us.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'm almost beside myself with that introduction. It was too generous. We'll see if you're saying the same things in about 10 minutes when I've completed this intervention. And thank you for the work that you're doing, both in these spaces, but also perhaps much more importantly at the local level with the communities that you're engaging with every day. It's, of course, the most vital governance level. It's where most people interact with government. So what I do here is sort of in a tower away from the people, which is a problem that we just identified. And perhaps after this Summit of the Future process, we can have a new way of engaging that brings the local and the global in closer cooperation. So as mentioned, I'm Dan Perel. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Coalition for the UN We Need, along with Maria Fernanda Espinosa, who I believe you all know quite well from her previous engagements with UCLG. I also serve as a representative for the Baha'i International Community's United Nations office, and I sit here in New York. So as I understand it, I have two tasks before me. The first is to speak a little bit about where things stand with the international conversation on the Summit of the Future, what that is and where it came from, and then related to that, how to engage. And then the second, and perhaps what excites me more, is to offer a few reflections and questions on the international order as it stands. So those are the two parts. Here we go. So the Summit of the Future is called for in a report authored by the Secretary General called Our Common Agenda, with which I'm sure you're quite familiar. He, of course, suggested that this summit should take place in 2023, but as its a member state international governance body, they said it should be in 2024 because in 2023, there's the SDG summit. So now we have an extra year for consultation and conversation, and I actually am quite grateful for that extra year. However, there's also a little bit of tension taking place. I think many of you have identified some of the issues of mistrust, and I saw actually Cold War was one of the words that was put up as how you describe the international order. And it's like a new Cold War now with, some of these dichotomies being presented. And that plays out in a number of conversations, including those related to the Summit of the Future. And it is almost ironic that because the Summit of the Future was called for in 2023, and it's this idea of reforming multilateralism, many member states have said, no, we can't forget the business of the SDGs. And actually the SDGs, I would suggest, have taken a new layer of importance because of the call for the Summit of the Future. So in a sense, we achieved that goal, but maybe it wasn't exactly as the Secretary General had hoped. The modalities of our engagement in this process, our being non-state stakeholders, are as ever in a degree of tension. There's no formal way of engagement. but major groups and other stakeholders are mentioned in the resolution that articulates this process. So the major groups and other stakeholders, as you're well aware, include local authorities. And I had the pleasure of working with UCLG some years ago when I represented the NGO major group there. So I know that you are very engaged in that process, but it is sort of tangential a little bit at the moment. So we'll see how these things play out. And the Coalition for the UN We Need is really trying to rally non-state stakeholders to engage in this process. So whether it's academia or local authorities, as we have here, or NGOs, you name sort of the distinction, the category, and even individuals who may serve as member state representatives. We want to get a lot of engagement in this process. And I will say that even within civil society, it's not universally beloved, this idea of our common agenda and the Summit of the Future. Some think some agree that it's kind of a distraction from the processes that we're already engaged in. But I don't know that undermining this process is actually a good use of our energy, even if it's one with which we disagree. There are many processes that we disagree with, but we still, there's no I in team, and we still should try our best to engage it and to move it forward. But I would say that the vast majority of civil society is actually really excited about the Summit of the Future. Even if it may result in an imperfect outcome, even if there's political challenges, it's at least an acknowledgement that the current institutional arrangements are insufficient and something new is required. What that new thing is up for legitimate debate, and I look forward to having that and learning from others in that process. But I think this is where the vast majority of people and constituencies are. Now, in terms of the coalition, we are trying to articulate, and we're actually finalizing now, an interim People's Pact for the future. And this interim People's Pact runs through 7 themes, and it's called the People's Pact because the outcome document of the Summit of the Future will be what's called the Pact for the Future, a title with which you may be somewhat familiar, although I think you were there first. Anyhow, the People's Pact will run through 7 themes with 5 recommendations each. And I can, share a link once it's available. It'll come out hopefully next week. But it's an interim pact, which means that there's an aspiration for a lot more consultation in the future. And just by way of an example, we have highlighted as one of the cross-cutting issues this idea of subsidiarity, which I would identify more as a question of the primacy of the nation state in international relations. This primacy of the nation state has done a disservice both to supranational and subnational government. We don't have a solid understanding of where authority should be on which issues, and I think the subsidiarity principle is something that needs real exploration to make a meaningful impact. So I'm hopeful for your engagement, and I'm hopeful that you'll correct me where I misspeak and where I'm incorrect, particularly on those issues with which you have much more expertise. So now the second part, and I know I'm 5 minutes in, is a little bit of my own reflections and raising of questions. So the basic presumption of what I want to share now is that current systems of international governance are unlikely to be in place in the distant future. So what we have is not the final evolution of government. It's not the pinnacle. So then we have to ask ourselves, what will international governance look like in the future? What should it be and not be? And what steps can we take today to get us there? Current institutions, systems, and structures often act as veils to our vision and imagination. For example, on the Security Council, we ask how many members and who should get the veto. I haven't heard very often, why do we have a Security Council? There's no other government regime that has this kind of a structure. Is that really the aspirational structure that we should have? And of course, these dimensions of the current international order are things that we have to deal with, and any step we take toward that longer vision may have to deal with the institutions we have, but I think this broader imagination might be quite helpful. I've been working alongside the UN for about 12 years, and in those 12 years, I've learned quite a bit about onions. That is the different layers of engagement that we often try to bring to the table. And I actually want to align my onion with a lot of the work you're doing. The outer layer, this first layer, the one we see the most, is actually the individual. And I think that corresponds to trust. And I really enjoyed the bit of the conversation I was able to hear yesterday on the issue of trust. The second layer is on institutions. And here I would suggest it corresponds to finance and the economy. The third layer is the legal framework. That's the governance architecture. The fourth layer is our underlying assumptions. And I think at this moment, it really corresponds to the global commons. And then there's a fifth layer, which is actually the underlying narrative within which everything is embedded. So I'll just offer a few thoughts on each of these. I know I have 2 minutes left, but very quickly, many people who engage in advocacy at the UN are talking about the changing of individuals. But this often doesn't result in the kinds of outcomes we seek. And I think that's because we can't just change the players of the game. We have to actually change the nature of the game. And here, trust is a fundamental prerequisite. Without it, no agreement can be expected to succeed. And the failure of agreements breeds further mistrust. And I think a lot of the individuals we have in positions of authority have to be better demonstrators of the trust of the people. So translating, as you were saying earlier, conceptions of leadership, perhaps to conceptions of service. That is something with which local authorities, I think, are quite familiar. So then the second layer is, if it's not the players, it may be the game. So then we have to start to think about what are the structures in place. And one that I often think about is, the ideas of finance and taxation. And that's a conversation we really need to have. Perhaps we can at another time. But to grossly oversimplify it, the UN is dependent not on direct taxation, but on member state contributions. So what ownership do citizens have when it's their nation state that is making the contributions? There's no Tobin tax or luxury taxes, things like this, which could save the UN from being entirely beholden to the nation state. So the structure that we have is really challenging. And it also is sort of, it makes it easy to create enemies out of the corporate sector or oil companies or what have you, because we get so frustrated with the game that's being played. But the game is based on a set of rules. And that's the third layer, which is the legal framework, which often incentivizes those first two layers. And here, I would say it's sort of the governance architecture. Right now, our governance architecture is built on profit maximization. So we have laws on the books that require quarterly profits. And there are all kinds of things there that I think in our daily lives, people would not agree with. But when it comes to our engagement professionally, we just do it. And I might say it's like American football. We all can agree that on the street, you can't just tackle someone. That's totally inappropriate. In fact, you could be arrested. But when you're playing American football, not only should you tackle people, but you have to tackle people if you want to win. So I think that our rules of the game are structured in such a way that it's actually counter to what we actually envision as progress. Now, the fourth layer is our underlying assumptions. And here I would say this issue of the commons is really important. And we start to ask big questions here. If it's not about profit, what does progress look like? What does a new world order actually look like? What sport do we want to be playing? The purpose of a given sport may be to kick the ball in the net, but now we're asking, is that really what we want to be doing? So if we were to fast forward 100 years, if the problems we have today were solved, how do you think we would have gotten there? I think it's at this level that we would have created some new underlying assumptions about progress, upon which a new governance structure could be built, upon which new structures would be, and upon which new players would play. So finally, I want to get to the last layer, which is, to me, the deepest one, which is our conceptual framework. So how do we decide as a species what it is we value? How do we decide what that fourth layer is? What are the grand narratives we tell ourselves about progress? Are humans inherently violent? This is, I think, a really important fundamental question. And in other words, in a sport like soccer or non-American football, we're competing against each other. But maybe this idea of sport as adversarial or competition should be changed entirely. Are there new understandings of societal organization that conduce to the betterment of populations? And just to provide an example, here I would suggest it's important to start with something that we all experience and share, something that's really vital to everyone, and that is love. If something like love were our starting point, what would our next layers look like if it's built on that foundation? And I think here you could also say trust. Trustworthiness is at this base layer as well. And while it may seem soft, it's actually a tremendous motivator. And at the level of the family and the community, it really finds its greatest expression. And this is where I think local authorities have such an important role, because that's the government institution that engages the most with family, with community, with those places of love. And it makes me wonder how we can build up new societies based on these new foundations. And to me, I think this is clearly the challenge you've set for yourself. And I'm sure you know you have many friends and allies, including myself and many others, who are encouraging your efforts and looking forward to the fruitful results. So those are a few thoughts, and thank you so much again for the opportunity to share them with you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. I think you can advocate for our Pact of the Future, and we will be very happy to contribute to the People's Pact for the Future as well, because I think they are one and the same. If I would dare presenting the case before your group, I could easily argue that. Thank you also for bringing these. I mean, you have said so many things that connect the common agenda with the local level and also with the transformation of the system. But these layers that you have described are a very, very good framework. And there are some questions that, without asking without looking at the layers, we have found answers to in our pact. And so if profit is not progress, how do you measure progress for humanity in the future? And you have mentioned love, and we have put care at the center. So, because from the perspective of leadership as a service, care is what we should be focusing on. And also this issue of not being in competition. This is why governance needs to be in partnership. And we need to think not of individual cities, but systems of cities in this urban era, cities and territories. So thank you very much for a perfect framing, very, very inspiring. And we look forward to discussing further with you how to shape and what concrete proposals we could bring to the international discussion. Thank you again. Let us go now to Pefi Kingi, the Pacific Regional Focal Point for Migration. Pefi is also a UCLG Ubuntu advisor, and we have met Pefi within the context of articulating our inputs with civil society in the global migration discussions, and we have found ourselves discovering that our common agenda is bigger than migration itself, but that can be really articulated around our experience on human mobility. Pefi, it is a great pleasure to have you with us. The floor is yours. We cannot hear you, Pefi.
Munu tangaloa, ke tu tangaloa e mawhala. A lawhala hia tu ke mtulu si fraue ke atua ko whiriweia ke mga honi. Simply put, what can I, humble person such as I, actually add to the conversation that's going to make a difference? How does one move another's will, another's heart? I thought that we had progressed, and I seriously celebrated that we did indeed progress quite a bit. I was inspired when I came to your particular gathering, and I thought, oh my goodness, if these leaders were at UN, the world would certainly indeed be turned on its head, and we would produce so many proactive outcomes for our peoples, especially our Indigenous peoples. And so, on behalf of my little peoples, I thought, oh, I must do the national thing and support the loyals because, after all, we are under the Commonwealth. And so I attended the coronation, such as quite a few of you did last weekend or thereabouts, only to find myself the topic and the center of somebody else's humor. We became fodder for someone else's jest. There was a comment put out by the commentators of Sky News, and it concerned the demise of the Tuvalu people. Not only did they mispronounce my people's names, but they laughed at their demise, at the fact that they were indeed sinking, as it were. It saddened a lot of us, and of course we did the, our due gathering and decided that we would call them out. You know, just when you think you have progressed, others would demonstrate that actually we have not. It takes political will. You leaders on the screen, off the screen, you have power like I've not seen before. I was so impressed and just utterly excited. The answer and the solutions are within this collective. And it just needs your will, your power to actually motivate the change, the transformation that is required for all of us to be engaged, to be interacting. You have invited us. Invite a few more of us. It just takes a little bit more strategic thinking, and you will have quite a few of us at the table. And we will embellish whatever menu you have set before you. We are fine chefs. We can tailor any cooking to fit the purpose. So don't stop inviting us to the table. Don't fear what you don't know. We might surprise you, not only with our generosity of heart, but also with the smartness of our own worldviews, our paradigms that has naught else but just goodwill and good purpose. And what we share, what we have in common is a legacy that we want for our children. That's it. You know, I actually wrote a wonderful speech, which was, fairly academic and, because many of us are inclined to be so. But I thought, no, I think I really prefer to speak from the heart because you will understand that. Daniel has mentioned love. I wouldn't go that far. It takes a little bit more trust to love, but perhaps to have compassion. That would be an amazing ingredient to have in your repertoire of skills, of strategies, of intent for change that is required. And that's what this reset, this period of reformation has actually allowed us, is to rethink what are the other possibilities that haven't yet been achieved amongst our peoples, between ourselves, between nations. You have what it takes to actually have your 20 seats at that particular level. You should have it. You have been denied that right. Keep fighting for that. We are behind you, but have us behind you, have us beside you. It will make a difference. So you must have them beside you too. They need to be part of this equation, because if after all you are having this architecture design co-created for them, then they must be part of that solution. But thank you for having us at your table. I'm thinking to myself that I just want to reiterate that compassion must not be missing from your dialogue, from the table. Be vibrant, be fiery, be all of the above, but most of all, be compassionate in how you approach how you will change the world together. Thank you for my 3 minutes worth, because at UN that's all you're allowed. So thank you for my 3 minutes worth. Over to you, our leader, Secretary General.
Thank you very much, Pefi. It is always a pleasure to have you with us, and I am very grateful for you framing this as a reset. We need to do a reset, and that reset is I think it is an exercise of finding our own humanity, redefining the rules of the game, as Daniel was saying, and not accepting the rules as we know them now. It will take that far. And so that is the moment that we are in. Compassion, humanity, love, and care need to be part of that equation. So all of these words will need to transform in concrete policy, in concrete actions for us. So thank you both for framing this. I think we have all the ingredients for this conversation. And I am moving on now for the next segment of our discussion, where we look at specific contributions. I am going to start with Philip Rode, the Executive Director of LSE Cities, that has been working with us around many things, but in particular around our governance, emergency governance initiative, where we have been studying what it means to govern in the current context, right? And we thought about this before the COVID outbreak. COVID came and it really influenced the kind of work that that we were doing, but I think many of the conclusions and the findings that we have are relevant for other situations, other emergencies, and will guide many of the answers around rethinking governance in this kind of perma crisis that we need to face with several layers. So I'm very happy that you are with us, Philippe. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Emilia. This is going to be a difficult act to follow, given what we've just heard. I will sound like a technocrat, but I hope, nevertheless, to enlighten you on some thoughts that will be critical for our conversation and engagement. It's been pretty much 3 years to the month that we have started formally the Emergency Governance Initiative, and many of you will be familiar to what we have been working on. This is a very brief opportunity. I'll do this in less than 5 minutes to position it within this particular debate you are having today. And on that one, we need to, I guess, really appreciate that emergency governance is a classic example of an instrumental approach of view to governance reform. You are seeing a problem and you're seeing institutional capacity not being up to speed, not living up to the expectation. And if we had to, in today's discussion, really bring it down to a particular aspect, it's certainly multi-level governance systems that need to considerably change to be equipped to much more effectively respond to, unfortunately, the complex emergencies that are on the horizon, if not already are with us. Let's move to the next slide. Colleagues asked me to also position this topic a bit in relation to the Pact for the Future. I was scanning the various documents, really looking at, in particular, angles of governance and question. And of course, you know, there are so many connection points. On people, the question of sustained participation is maybe, and even more so, democratic legitimacy, sort of the biggest challenge we are facing with the current approaches to emergencies and disaster response. But if we extend this over the long run, that's getting even more difficult. I think there's a very coherent narrative around addressing, of course, the planet. There are many components where there's overlap between emergency governance agendas and then what you have in the Pact. But ultimately, it comes down to, I think, thinking institutionally around economic development and ultimately, a bit what was just talked about. What's our collective aspiration? And finally, on government, we're coming back to the kind of new forms of inclusion, participatory sort of reforms to the democratic system, deliberation. And there are interesting experiments which have really been scaled. And if there is a positive to also COVID and the current climate emergency, it is that it does energize new forms of participation and the experimentation around it. Next slide, please. There are also obvious things, links with the commitments to the common agenda. Again, protecting the planet. I would highlight here the specific mentioning of declaring climate emergencies. That in itself is an act of governing. Sometimes it's quite easy to sort of call it on paper, but those local governments that take this seriously are then confronted with a range of implications, and then it's no longer as straightforward. Promoting peace, I think the point about strengthening international foresight is maybe the one that's most related to getting emergency governance right. And then, of course, ensuring justice, and I'll come back to this, particularly on the migration point. So let me now, in the last slide, use, in some ways, a provocation, a question about how we can make sense of all of this moving forward, and then also respond to the 4 broader questions which we are using today to unpack the question. But before, what's on the slide here is maybe a fundamental question which the Emergency Governance Initiative is currently really battling with. What are the criteria to better differentiate between and then prioritize new emergency governance architecture, which, and then the first level, where really individual local governments can implement things tomorrow. The emergency assemblies are interesting vehicles, lots of digital era governance opportunities. The list is quite long, and we have captured this in total by now in 12 publications. Second, what specifically city government or city networks and local government associations can do and lead There's a lot about aggregating strategic input, speaking with one voice. I mean, the wonderful role UCLG has been pursuing for so many years. And then third, the topic of really what we're zooming in today is how the global municipal movement has to lead and lobby national governments through the international system. I think that's, of course, the unique opportunity where we can use the international system, the UN and otherwise, to help us with our own local national governments. When we are starting to address all of this, we, of course, need to come back to a realistic theory of institutional change that could be assigned to each of those spheres. And let me now just tease out a few more points. So on the first here, on the individual governments, I think that's where we can talk about the new essentials, rights and public services. Complex emergencies and societal transitions really require safety nets and protection. Otherwise, these transitions don't even take place in the first place. And that's something that can be provided locally, whether this is about rights for migrants or populations that may lose out because of a sort of transition that may also change the job market. That's sort of different context, but local government really can help on that front. And then we immediately jump to the second point here. I think your question about who sits at the decision-making table and why should it exist, whether it's at the national or international level. I mean, clearly, we always would say it exists because we need strategic oversight. We need to coordinate, we need to prioritize, and we need to assign resources. This is all stuff which typically the national governments then own, and they really want to advance, and they're very protective of this space. We can then ask the question, how can cities and regions have formal representation at that very decision-making table? And whether there is a form of advocating for conditional decentralized powers, as long as there's real local commitment to innovating emergency governance. And alongside then even scaling it further towards a bottom-up approach around new forms of deliberation and emergency assemblies. And then we come to the third point where I clearly see, of course, the question around multilateralism of the future, enabling coalitions of the willing. And this is the question of going beyond consensus. There's a real question about strong alignment by the World Bank, the IMF, the MDBs. A lot of these financial institutions often seem to be working almost in parallel to our conversations around local government, around local sustainability and emergency governance. A lot can be learned from input advisory of more conventional disaster response unit, UNHRC, International Red Cross, UNDAC. And ultimately, we have to maybe support certain local governments for spaces of governance experimentation. That means taking risk, and the collective can maybe buffer those risks. And finally, you asked the question about the involvement in decisions at the international level. Yes, is there an opportunity, particularly in relation to avoiding escalation and tensions and violence? Is there a new global conflict resolution committee that's led by cities and regions? And allow me sort of a bit of a polemic at the end, since the Security Council was already mentioned. Wouldn't it be wonderful to have UCLG have that seat at the table in even those kind of committees? Entirely unrealistic, I know, but if we are allowed to dream, I think that is maybe a dream one can have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Philip. You know, as we have seen conflict arising, sometimes we need to ask ourselves whether being there, we would have been able to make a difference and to choose a different path than the ones that have been chosen now. And there have been moments where I have had my doubts, but I also do think that this should be taken under advisement. Thank you for that presentation, which is not that technical. I think it has a very strong and relevant political implications. You have said many interesting things indeed, but I would like to emphasize this issue around the institutional change for the new essentials, which I think will really differentiate the kind of work that we are doing with the emergency governance initiative from the work that is usually done around resilience. I think that is where the difference is. And I think in the second phase of our work that we are now defining and fine-tuning about, this is the path probably that we will need to follow and to take into account. So thank you very much for that. Allow me now to go to my dear colleague and Secretary General of the Commonwealth Local Government Forum, Lucy. Welcome to this discussion. For many, many years, we have been defending governance reform at all levels. Our main entry point is, of course, the local level, decentralization, the relevance of subsidiarity. But we have also tried to have those values and principles reach the international arena. So, dear friend, I'm very happy to have you with us and to share where you think that discussion is from the perspective of the Commonwealth Local Government Forum and where we need to push for as we work towards the summit for the future. Welcome, Lucy.
Thanks very much, Emilia, and thanks everyone. It's great to be here. And I'd really like to kind of thank colleagues who have gone before me in terms of this discussion and setting a really the important context in which we're working. One of the things we were asked to do was to kind of pick a picture. This was my picture, which is Stronger Together. And I think in many ways that really encapsulates one of the sort of important functions of local government, and one of the reasons why, local government should be part of the discussion that we're having today. And I think, you said this yourself, Dan, when you were giving your opening remarks. Local government is the form of government closest to the people. We hear a lot about that. But I think that we really need to remember that when we're thinking in that broader kind of governance continuum, and particularly when we're thinking about the changing international governance architecture. And the real thing for me is the how. It's about how we ensure that our governance architecture really does keep people at the center. And I think, as Emilia said, this is something which is at all levels. And I think there's a few things I just want to kind of touch on very quickly. In terms of this, the first is very much around political will. And I think, governments, international agencies, organizations have to have the political will to recognize local government more than just a sideline in a document, but as a key partner in development and a key partner in the delivery of the development outcomes that we're looking for globally. And I think whether that's around peace and security, whether that's around economic opportunities, or whether that's around peace and managing conflict. And I think alongside that political will has to come resources, because I think, we can't do this without recognizing that we need to invest in the kind of governance architecture that we want to see, that we know will deliver for local people. And then my final kind of piece of the jigsaw relates a little bit to the point that Kinga made in her opening remarks, which is also around, empowerment. And we as local government have to make sure that we have a representative, diverse group of stakeholders who are driving our decision making, who are part of our leadership. And that then enables us to step up and be an active and reliable kind of partner in terms of that multi-level governance, both domestically. And I think that this is also very challenging. We know that local government needs to be integrated better with national structures through national governments, but it's not always easy to achieve that. So there's a lot of work, I think, to do domestically at a national level to kind of build that multi-level governance in our respective countries. And then, of course, what we're really anxious to see, and as a movement of local government, we really feel that there's a strong role that we can play in bringing the voice of local communities into some of these international decision-making fora. And we talk a lot about the decision-making table. I would actually argue that there are perhaps a number of decision-making tables. And I think the key thing for us as local government is making sure that there is a voice And I think it has to be more than being consulted. I think being consulted is hugely important. And I think as the Global Task Force, we have really valued the opportunity to be consulted. But I think we also feel that we could offer more, we could add more value if we have more of a decision-making role, if we could actually be more around the table when the international institutions are making some of the decisions that directly affect local governments and local people, and really try to keep the focus on our local needs. And then I guess finally, just that final question, because I think, we are making progress. And I think, Emilia, I'm sure you'll be wanting to talk about this a little bit more. I think we are making progress, particularly vis-a-vis the UN, particularly vis-a-vis the way in which local government is engaging, for example, with UN Habitat, with the possibility of a kind of more of a formal committee. But I think it's that kind of like that formality and that sort of official kind of nature of engagement is also something that we feel that we could contribute effectively to. And I think all of this really kind of feeds into kind of three of the broad areas that are in the common agenda. One, of course, is the leaving no one behind, because it is about making sure that, the process is inclusive and the process reaches as far to the grassroots as possible. Obviously, there's a huge opportunity for us to partner at the grassroots level with civil society as well, but also to partner with our central governments. And I think, as many people have said, it is also about building trust in those institutions. We need to win back, in many cases, the trust at the local level. We need to look at innovative mechanisms for making and ensuring that people do feel that their local governments are responding to their needs and are listening to their concerns, and then amplifying that at a national and an international level. And then finally, because I think it's really important we don't forget this, that we don't forget the marginalized in the work that we're doing. And particularly, I think, as a global movement, we're very keen to ensure that we don't marginalize the voices of women and the needs of women and children in the decision-making process. And I think we would feel, very strongly that this is something that we can bring to the table.
Thank you very much, Lucy, for these inputs. Indeed, I mean, it's about the voices that need to be around the table, and that in itself is legitimate enough. We also say that within the feminist movement. I mean, is having a seat because all genders need to be at the table. But not only that, now I think we are also pushing for quality in the type of decisions that we make. And that change can only come with a change of actors and change of priorities. This is what we're talking about. And with that, and showing the skills and expertise that we all have, comes also the difference between being consulted and being part of decision making. And if there is an agenda where we have been able to show a difference, even if it has been difficult, is the localization agenda as well. I mean, the acknowledgement of member states of how relevant local and regional governments are for the achievement of Agenda 2030 is very, very, I mean, it gives us hope. It's not coming with the kind of investment that we need. And so that is what we will need to think about. But this links very well with the next presentation that is coming from Asier Arrabadi, from the Basque Government, General Secretariat for Social Transition and the 2030 Agenda. There are few regional governments in the world, a few territories that have understood the necessity of localization and the relevance of the multi-level localization efforts as the Basque Government. And we are really, really grateful to have you with us here. Asier, nos encanta que estés, nos encanta también poder contar un poquito de las ideas que tenemos también como territorio para esa agenda más amplia de la ONU a través de Local 2030. O sea que, Asier, a ti la palabra y muchas gracias por estar con nosotros hoy.
Muchas gracias a ti, Emilia. Thank you very much. Tal como ha comentado Emilia, por nuestra parte, de una forma bastante breve, sintética, dar cuenta de lo que estamos haciendo en Euskadi en relación a la implementación de la Agenda 2030. En primer lugar, tal como se ha comentado a lo largo de la jornada hasta el momento, para que la Agenda 2030 sea realmente transformadora es fundamental que esa agenda esté dotada de un buen sistema de gobernanza, tanto multinivel como multiactor, de forma que las diferentes instituciones estén bien alineadas y a su vez existan buenos canales de participación tanto de la sociedad civil organizada como de la ciudadanía en su conjunto. Y es de lo que estamos tratando de materializar en Euskadi en los últimos tiempos. En esta primera diapositiva lo que podéis ver es la necesidad de crear infraestructuras que nos comprometan el desarrollo de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. Entendemos que sin infraestructuras básicas es imposible articular un buen sistema de gobernanza y, por tanto, implementar adecuadamente la Agenda 2030. En nuestro caso particular, estaríamos hablando de 5 infraestructuras. La primera de ellas sería, en nuestro caso por lo menos, dotar a la Agenda 2030 de la centralidad en la estructura del gobierno. En nuestro caso, la Agenda 2030 se coordina desde la presidencia del gobierno vasco. En segundo lugar, tener un documento de planeamiento o de planificación estratégica. En nuestro caso tenemos, además del programa de gobierno perfectamente alineado con los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, tenemos el programa vasco de prioridades Agenda 2030, donde priorizamos las principales actuaciones que entendemos son actuaciones emblemáticas, tractoras o transformadoras para poder, en definitiva, contribuir de forma eficiente a los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. Y cuando hablamos de proyectos emblemáticos, nos referimos sobre todo a proyectos compartidos entre los diferentes niveles institucionales. Tener a su vez un buen alineamiento presupuestario, de forma que los presupuestos de los diferentes niveles institucionales estén también alineados según las actuaciones prioritarias que se quieran materializar. Y luego dotarnos de un buen sistema de indicadores de seguimiento y evaluación. En el caso concreto de Euskadi, estamos a día de hoy haciendo un esfuerzo importante a la hora de alinear los presupuestos de los 3 niveles institucionales, Gobierno vasco, Diputaciones forales y la totalidad de los ayuntamientos. Y también estamos inmersos en un esfuerzo importante de alinear los indicadores, de forma que hoy por hoy tenemos más de 50 indicadores alineados entre los 3 niveles, entre el Gobierno vasco, Diputaciones forales y ayuntamientos. Y todos ellos son indicadores desagregables hasta el nivel municipal, de forma que las comparativas son completamente homologables. No solo internamente, sino también con el resto de comunidades autónomas del Estado español, así como con aquellas otras unidades regionales y locales de referencia para nosotros. La cuarta infraestructura, que para nosotros es una infraestructura básica, sería el foro multiagente y multiactor del cual nos hemos dotado. Aquí hago una pequeña pausa para explicar un poco mejor en qué consiste el foro multiagente y multiactor. Para nosotros es fundamental implicar a la sociedad en su conjunto en la elaboración de las políticas públicas que contribuyan a los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. Y creo que lo estamos consiguiendo, y lo estamos consiguiendo gracias al funcionamiento de un foro multinivel y multiactor. Digo multinivel porque funciona mediante un plenario y una comisión permanente y a su vez mediante un grupo de trabajo de gobernanza en el cual estamos los diferentes niveles institucionales, en definitiva, alineando las políticas públicas. A su vez también hemos incorporado como grupo de trabajo a la agenda urbana, de forma que este año por primera vez, cuando hemos presentado a las Naciones Unidas el informe voluntario de progreso, hemos incorporado, mejor dicho, el informe relativo también a la agenda urbana. Y luego tenemos 3 grupos de trabajo que están íntimamente ligados con las 3 transformaciones en las que estamos inmersos. Por una parte, la transformación social, por otra parte la transformación energético-climática y por último la transformación económico-digital. Y en lo que respecta a la transformación social, pues tenemos dos líneas de trabajo claramente establecidas. Por una parte, cómo hacer frente al reto demográfico y por otra parte, cómo trabajar la emancipación de la gente más joven, de los jóvenes. Porque se da la circunstancia de que Euskadi es una sociedad muy envejecida y en ese sentido, pues para nosotros el reto demográfico es un reto prioritario. Sobre todo en la línea de crear nuevas familias para que podamos tener en definitiva el número de hijos e hijas que cada familia quiera tener y a su vez también tratar de retener y atraer talento. Y en ello estamos. Y por último, pues la quinta infraestructura sería la infraestructura que está destinada a divulgar y a extender socialmente lo que es la Agenda 2030. ¿Cómo lo estamos haciendo? Y pasamos a la siguiente diapositiva. Lo estamos haciendo vinculando las políticas públicas de Euskadi con el Pacto para el Futuro en esos tres ámbitos que son las personas, el planeta y el gobierno. Y ahí tenemos pues, 7 proyectos emblemáticos a nivel de país que responden a otros tantos compromisos tractores y que responden a su vez a los diferentes ejes de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, como son las personas, el planeta, la prosperidad y la paz. Son 7 proyectos emblemáticos de diversa índole en los cuales estamos trabajando los diferentes niveles institucionales, así como la sociedad civil en su conjunto. Son 7 proyectos emblemáticos que responden a su vez a diferentes ámbitos de actuación. El primero de ellos, el proyecto Equitatea, responde a todo aquello que tiene que ver con la generación de igualdad de oportunidades. El segundo de los proyectos es sobre la educación inclusiva. El tercero de los proyectos es sobre el proyecto Ekiola, que trata de revertir el cambio climático. Es un proyecto muy singular que trata de crear en los municipios vascos comunidades cooperativas para poder, en definitiva, generar energía a partir de placas fotovoltaicas. O sea, sería generación de energía a partir de fuentes renovables. El proyecto Upengela, que lo estamos llevando adelante dentro de lo que es la agenda urbana, que trataría sobre cómo rehabilitar los diferentes barrios de las diferentes ciudades vascas que tienen diferentes problemáticas relativas a la inclusión social. Por otra parte, el proyecto de salud global, que pone la mirada sobre todo en la cooperación al desarrollo con aquellos países que nos demanden. Otro proyecto, el sexto, que estaría ligado a la economía circular. Y el séptimo proyecto, que sería la explicación del caso vasco, porque como bien sabéis hemos padecido demasiados años de violencia terrorista, de ahí tenemos múltiples aprendizajes y a partir de ahí estamos modelizando el sistema del caso vasco para que pueda servir para la solución de otro tipo de conflictos. Y con los proyectos emblemáticos lo que tratamos realmente es de priorizar el carácter transformador de lo que es la Agenda 2030. Y todo ello de la mano de la ciudadanía vasca. Y lo tratamos de hacer mediante una plataforma de experimentación que es parte también del foro multiagente y multiactor, que es la plataforma de experimentación GUNEAC, donde estamos más de 80 agentes económicos, sociales y culturales, y en la que estamos llevando adelante sobre todo 2 líneas de trabajo fundamentales. Por una parte, un marco referencial y una herramienta digital para que todo tipo de organizaciones hagan un análisis propio de cómo se encuentran en lo que respecta a la contribución suya en particular a los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible y luego, por otra parte, la generación de espacios de reflexión en la que participa la ciudadanía anónima para, en definitiva, implicar e interpretar a la misma en relación al cumplimiento de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible. Con líneas de trabajo muy sencillas, como puede ser el de la alimentación o la gastronomía sostenible, con el objetivo último de elaborar una guía de alimentación sostenible para, con la práctica habitual de comer todos los días, cómo podemos contribuir de forma decidida a los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible en sus diferentes ámbitos. En ello estamos en lo que respecta a esta plataforma de experimentación mundial. Y yendo ya a la siguiente diapositiva, de lo que se trata en definitiva es de modelizar el sistema de gobernanza multinivel y multiactor que tenemos en Euskadi y de la mano de entidades como la CGLU, Region for Plataforma o, como no, el propio secretario local 2030 ubicada en Bilbao y que esperemos se ponga en marcha durante los próximos meses, modelizar los trabajos que estamos realizando aquí para, en su caso, puedan valer en otras latitudes del planeta. Ese sería un poco nuestro objetivo. Y siempre con esa doble visión local, de implementar la agenda localmente, pero a su vez también contribuyendo globalmente, de forma que todos y cada uno de los proyectos emblemáticos en los cuales estamos trabajando los diferentes niveles institucionales tienen a su vez una réplica de la mano de la Agencia Vasca de Cooperación en los países en desarrollo. Este sería un poco el planteamiento del sistema de gobernanza multinivel, multiactor que tenemos en Euskadi. Y ya la última transparencia o diapositiva, pues haría referencia a la propuesta NOW que acabamos de aprobar en el seno del foro multinivel y multiactor y que estamos trasladando a las diferentes instancias internacionales y a las diferentes redes de las cuales somos parte. Lo hemos hecho también con la CGLU. ¿En qué consiste la propuesta NOW? Pues consiste en decir alto y claro que la futura cumbre de los Objetivos de Desarrollo Sostenible a celebrar en septiembre no sea solo una cumbre en la que participen jefes de Estado y Gobierno, sino que abra también sus puertas a las entidades regionales y locales, porque no podemos olvidar que el 70% de las competencias son nuestras, de las entidades regionales y locales. Y en ese sentido, pues bueno, sería una especie de propuesta para poder diseñar a lo largo de este proceso pues un nuevo modelo común que nos permita evaluar conjuntamente a lo largo de los próximos años cómo estamos implementando la Agenda 2030 y cómo estamos contribuyendo a los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible a nivel global y que cuente a su vez con un panel claro y sencillo de las principales prioridades hasta 2030 para que todos vayamos trabajando en la misma dirección. Este sería el objetivo de la propuesta NOW, que sería, en definitiva, pues una especie de aldabonazo a las Naciones Unidas, de las que, lógicamente, como entidad subestatal también nos sentimos parte, gracias a alianzas como la CGLU, y al final pues es un acto de contrición, por así decirlo, diciendo alto y claro que, bueno, que hasta el presente, por diversas circunstancias, entre las cuales está lógicamente la pandemia y la guerra de Ucrania, no hemos dado los pasos necesarios para que podamos cumplir con lo que establecimos ya en el 2015, pero que todavía tenemos una serie de años, 7 años concretamente de cada 2030, para que nos pongamos las pilas y trabajemos todos en la buena dirección. Muchísimas gracias por la atención y espero que la contribución realizada por parte de Euskadi haya valido la pena. Muchísimas gracias a todos y particularmente a ti, Emilia, por las deferencias que siempre tienes con nosotros.
Muchísimas gracias, Asier. A ver, yo creo que no solamente ha valido la pena, yo creo que me encanta porque es la materialización de cómo nuestro trabajo global, regional, llega a lo local y a los territorios y es cómo enlazamos las agendas de los barrios a esa agenda global que siempre decimos que está totalmente conectada, ¿no? Y que no lo podemos dejar como una cosa abstracta si queremos, pero eso entonces indica poca voluntad política para cambiar algunas cosas. Y me encanta también que los informes voluntarios, tanto los subnacionales como los locales, se vean aquí reflejados como un instrumento de hacer política, de crear interlocución. Creo que es extremadamente importante. Y muchas gracias también por esa agenda NOW, ¿no? por esas reivindicaciones para que se abra la cumbre y para que, yo diría también, además de la cumbre, los High Level Political Forum tienen que dar un espacio diferente regularmente a los gobiernos locales y articularlo alrededor de estos informes voluntarios locales y subnacionales que venimos apoyando, porque nos ayudan a ver las cuestiones que tenemos que tratar en la cumbre para el futuro y en la cumbre social, ¿no? ¿Cuál es el cambio de prioridades que tenemos que estimular? So thank you very much, all of you, for these inputs. We will include our Vice President for Latin America, that was due to be in this segment but had to leave, he will return later on, the Mayor of Esteban Echevarria, also with a local perspective to this, so an association perspective, a territorial perspective, a partner perspective, and that local perspective we are missing, but we will recover it during the Agora. The next segment now is the segment that we call In Focus, and we always call a relevant high impact partner to join us and share with us their perspective of related to the agenda. And this time, I'm very, very happy that we have with us the General Manager of Programs for the African Center for the Constructive Resolution of Disputes, our colleagues from Accord, Karishma Raju. I am very happy you are with us. In this international architecture of governance that we are talking about today, it's impossible not to talk about conflict and disputes, how we resolve them, and whether we have the right mechanisms. And in this, the expertise and the vision of Accord is extremely important for us. So thank you for joining us. The floor is yours as the In Focus partner of today.
Thank you so much, Amelia, and for giving Accord the opportunity to be able to share some of our insights. It is indeed an important time that we find ourselves as a conflict management institution, and from the work that we have done over the years, having to work on peace processes across Burundi, the DRC, the Central African Republic, there have been many lessons that we have drawn into where it is we place the focus and emphasis of our work currently in the context of conflicts that we are seeing today. From the earlier discussions and what the colleagues have shared around, a crisis of multilateralism, which seems to be emerging, if not already here. But I think it's almost like the crisis of this multilateral system has been many years in the making and almost coming towards us. So I think the conversations that the UCLG and the entire local government associations are having around this is quite critical, recognizing that there still is a need for continuous dialogue as well as international cooperation on many fronts. But how that system adapts to what it is we're dealing with at the level of conflicts within particularly the continent that I come from. And we have to be able to find ways in which the system changes and the system adapts. Today, we find that it's almost a sense of national interest instead of global responsibility. So when we talk about a government that is fit to care and for care, with the power to transform and act, we know that the responsibility has to work on many fronts and at many levels. So local, national, to an engagement on the global, but also global to national and local as well. And I think this is where we see a critical role in terms of the local governance architecture and how it is reframed to be able to participate and work in the international space as well. We know that the change needs to be acknowledged and incorporated in a more inclusive way, and we've seen that with the first question that was asked to the group as well. And we talked about participatory, inclusive, also being performance-driven as well. So if we have to look at the current multilateral system and whether it can actually support the current types of conflicts and build peace today, we need to assess whether it's a case of having to anticipate more and react less. And I think this is also relevant for local governments and local governance structures as well. If we look at the convergence rather of the many challenges that we find ourselves in today, including population growth, rapid urbanization into cities that are sometimes unplanned for it, jobless economic growth, poor to non-existent social services, we know that this is going to continue to lead to cycles of social and political conflict. This in turn is creating fertile ground for radicalized insurgencies as well as criminal syndicates that we see that are growing. But the convergence means that intergovernmental agencies are finding it rather difficult to intervene in these types of conflicts, which are in the main internal. We know that there is a need for peace processes to involve a multitude of actors of society, and it's looking at the way in which we can introduce multiple and diverse responders to conflict as well. And this is particular at the level of local and national governments and local and national actors that we see. We note this especially considering the distressing track records of peace agreements post-2005. And we have been able to see this firsthand in the work that we have been doing with Ethiopian women. While we know that there are international protocols and norms that call for the inclusion of women in peace processes, a process that took place in 2022, looked at the Ethiopian peace agreement and the permanent cessation of hostilities for Ethiopia. And there was one glaring aspect in this, and this was the exclusion of women in the agreement. Now, this was an AU-led process, also at the helm of, the United Nations being involved, a range of member states in terms of where this was held. But we had to find ourselves working with women CSO leaders who themselves brought together entities from across all the different regional entities in the country to be able to share their own experiences and the impact that the conflict was having on women and children within their own communities. What we found was resounding similarities across the women, but what they have intended and are working towards doing is ensuring their place in the agreement's implementation process and ensuring that future discussions are guaranteed at the local level as well as at the national level. Yesterday's discussions on trust and today's earlier conversations focused much on trust as well as confidence building. But what we need to figure out is how do we deal with this at the level of the local communities. One thing we found that yes, trust and confidence building is relevant, but what is also important is that there has to be skills building. So the shift from having to build skills in peace building, in dialogue, in negotiation, mediation, are ways in which we can find communities having to contribute comprehensively to a holistic conflict management process, and ways in which we can actually address complex situations. Now, strengthening the capacity of these stakeholders means that, yes, there is existing capacities, but what we have to find is how do we look at ways in which the local is involved in this? We know that outside interventions can typically sometimes have a limited impact and takes the form of law and order enforcement in most conflict situations. And once the level and intensity of the conflict breaks into the national consciousness, we have to be able to find ways that looks at designing effective conflict management processes, which we started to work on. There has been an increase in the number of opportunities at the local level, but this was routinely overlooked by the international community. Today, we're finding, particularly with our work with UCLG Africa, on a sustained program providing training of trainers as well as mentorship and coaching in conflict management. We've seen it translate into the work that we have done with the FemWise Africa, which is the African Women Mediators Network, where at the level of the African Union already having to see this as ways in which we can decentralize the process. So we have started to work with local women, particularly in the case of South Sudan, as well as Zimbabwe, and looking at ways in which we can start to work with local women, connecting it into the national action plans for women, peace and security as well. Similar to this, we are working with peace ambassadors in Mozambique, again, linked to their own national action plan on women, peace and security, and looking at ways in which women can influence peace building and the national reconciliation process by having a consolidated national women's movement. On the youth front, we have been working again with the African Union on its continental peace framework, and through an intergenerational process, looking at it for how we give voice and platform to young leaders across the continent, together with their national structures, but also at the level of the African Union. Now, we know that local actors have an intimate contextual understanding and have access to communities and structures which are they're critical to creating lasting peace outcomes. So therefore, we think it's time to shift from state-centric blueprint type of processes that are technocratic in nature, but to find ways in which we can be more flexible and more adaptive. And I think if we think about the multilateral system holistically, flexible and adaptive are words that it needs to look at in terms of dealing with the complex situations we find ourselves in. So again, anticipate more, react less. And if we want to strengthen relations from local to national and international decision-making, we have to know that there is resilience and agency of people and communities. And I think you have mentioned this, Emilia, as well. And if anything that COVID-19 showed us was the global showcase that resilience exists and peace-building work continued across our continent, in spite of having international actors not being able to travel there. We also need to think of ways for adequate, predictable, and sustained resources and look at reassessing the value of big interventions. I think we find this often in international processes where large interventions are the order of the day, but we limit ourselves in terms of the local expertise that is available and ways in which we can better resource and connect organizations as well. We need to look at building an environment where there is an enabling space, considering the level of shrinking civic space that we are seeing. But we also have to talk about access. I know we've mentioned the Summit of the Future that's taking place as well. But when we think about the local and the localization process in that, how much of it is being accessible to the communities that we are talking to as well? There is a need also for different footprints in the knowledge system itself. And this we have seen firsthand in the work that we have done in the Central African Republic, where even in the context of the peace agreement, terminology such as sustained peace was often questioned and often, particularly in the communities, for what this actually meant. So how do we start to draw on other knowledge systems while we talk about institution building, care, trust, and confidence building? And finally, I think a step in the right direction, which has been the UNSG's commitment to making funds available and monies available to local recipients rather than a percentage contribution, but actually looking at it from the basis of making full funding available to CSOs so that their work can actually get done in the communities. And with that, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Karishma, for this interesting presentation that reflects a whole legacy of accord in conflict resolution. The issue of rethinking outside interventions and the impact that it has in governance, but also rethinking how many conflicts we forget at the international level. We have our director for the Lebanon office and the presidents of UCLG in Lebanon very soon coming up in the Agora, and we can see that there are conflicts that you give that we give preference to internationally, that we prioritize, others that we kind of forget. Overall, I think the investment in governance structure are very important in local knowledge, and as you said, anticipating and moving away from the single state-centric approach will be very critical for us. Very often our membership, not only after a conflict, but after a crisis in general, they lose legitimacy because people are addressing the international agencies that are coming to their territories more than the local governance structures. Those remain left aside, right? So this is a work that is certainly important for us, and I hope that we can build on your experience also with UCLG Africa, and that we can collaborate for this kind of learning and capacity building that you are doing with many of our members. So thank you for this in focus that will certainly inspire our work plan. And let us go now, moving ahead to our next segment, to the Agora. Before I go there, and as we have been doing over the past editions, I want to present to you the tool that we are using to capture all the discussions that we are having. It is a mural. It is an electronic tool that we have shaped in the form of a Ludo. We have been, if we open up the different colors, we can see that there are a kind of city squares. We have worked already in 3 of them that reflect the commons, the finance and the trust discussion. Please do go there, check them out, and also contribute to them. Today we will be working, we are working already on the last square for this edition of the Future Envisioning exercises. The square on governance, those square follow the methodology of the session, and you will have a quick presentation on how they are shaping up in a moment after our Agora discussions. So now let us move to the Agora. I am very happy to have with us Viviane Ugu. Viviane is a member of our youth caucus. She has been following our discussions, shaping the inputs of the town halls from the youth perspective, and also with active contributions to our pact for the future. We are very happy to have you with us, Viviane, and you will be now leading the conversation of our Agora. Thank you for being here and for helping us break the glass ceiling for youth in UCLG. We are not there yet, but we are coming closer. Thank you so much, Viviane.
Thanks to you, Emilia, for having me. Thank you to everyone for the incredible contributions that you've been doing today. I've been already introduced, and well, my task will be moderating a bit this Agora that is coming. But first, I wanted to share a bit of a reflection that I had after listening to all of your contributions, which have gone from quite philosophical ones to another, which are more material, as that of the secretarial at the Basque Country, right? And I think that very concretely, that's what we have to do. Go get like quite abstract ideas and be able to materialize them. There are 3 key ideas that I liked a lot after hearing you. The first one is the question of governing in partnership. The second idea I like is rethinking leadership. And finally, the change the rules of the game. And I'm going to tell you why. Because we are trying to rethink the architectural model of the international community, right? The governance architecture of the international community. But we are not going in depth into the structure of this international community. And so I wanted to share a bit on my perspective on, well, asking you somehow, how can we move from this idea of liberal peace that we are following to an idea of kind of a decolonial peace in which we are including not only local and regional governments, but actually the cosmologies from all the local and regional governments from across the world, right? Are we going to really change the international structure if we are following the same, to say somehow, cosmologies and rules that we follow today, but just including another level of governance? Or the real transformation comes from including other ways of governing, other ways of doing leadership, other ways of relating among each other into this common project? So that is my first reflection, but I don't want to talk a lot. So now I'm going to introduce to our speakers who are in this open floor. I'm going to start with Monsieur Michel Demy, who is the Director General of Cité Uni Livan. Also, we're having with us Paulo Illes, who is the Migrations Coordinator of the Brazilian government. We count also with Alexandra Novovic Menendez, who is the United Nations Migration platform from the Youth and Children focus group. and she's the focal point at the Madrid Youth Forum. Also, we have with us Hannes Lagrelius from the Accessibility Caucus, and she's a member of the World Blind Union. And finally, Francine Melchioretto, program officer at UN Habitat. Oh, and also we have with us Fernando Gray, Intendente de Esteban Echevarria. So I'm gonna ask you a question, and I'm gonna ask you to try to be quite brief in your answers, so we can try to answer also what other speakers are saying, and trying to build like this joint focus. I'm gonna start asking Bechir Demi what he believed that that we need when addressing the renewed structure of governments, and what is the purpose of this? When addressing this, the renewed structure of government, what is the purpose of a decision-making table, and also what does the new power structure may look like? What are the big transformations that we should do in this sense?
Merci Viviane, merci Emilia de votre invitation. Très rapidement, donc, si on regarde le système de gouvernance au Liban et au Moyen-Orient d'une manière générale, mais je parle surtout du Liban, je suis installé au Liban. Quand on parle de durabilité, ce qui est durable dans cette région-là, c'est l'instabilité, c'est ce qui est durable. Tout le reste, c'est des théories qui nous viennent de programmes, qui nous viennent des relations et des réseaux, etc. Quand on parle d'une crise et quand on parle d'une gouvernance locale, quand on parle de la décentralisation et tout ça, nous voyons dans la pratique, nous voyons en fait une sorte de grands principes occidentaux surtout, qui ne bougent pas vraiment avec les réalités du terrain dans d'autres pays, surtout les pays en voie de développement et en crise tout le temps. Quand on parle par exemple du Liban qui traverse une crise multisectorielle, donc sanitaire, économique, financière, puis la catastrophe du port de Beyrouth avec des victimes et plein de victimes, on attend toujours une sortie de crise du gouvernement qui ne vient pas. Ça ne vient pas, et donc ça nous montre la limite de la centralisation, et ça nous montre la décentralisation sans texte et sans loi, mais sur le terrain, directement. Donc, ce qui se passe aujourd'hui au Liban, par exemple, pour la gouvernance locale, vu que le gouvernement est paralysé tout le temps, on n'a pas de président, gouvernement démissionnaire, parlement qui ne se réunit pas, etc. Et donc, les maires qui sont réellement et véridiquement, et pas seulement dans les textes, ils sont au premier front. Et donc, ils travaillent main dans la main dans la société civile parce qu'ils trouvent maintenant que c'est l'unique passage de sortie. Donc, quand on a vu avant, quand on invitait avant les maires à dialoguer avec la société civile, avec les ONG locales, avec les acteurs locaux, etc., c'était pas gagné. Maintenant, en crise, c'est plutôt gagnant-gagnant. Donc, la municipalité arrive à fédérer ces acteurs locaux pour répondre à plusieurs problèmes. Donc, si je peux résumer quelques problèmes, l'énergie solaire, par exemple. Donc, comme on n'a plus de fuel et d'argent, etc., pour financer l'électricité, les villes sont passées directement, les maires sont passés directement et n'attendaient pas ni autorisation ni rien du tout du gouvernement central. Ils passaient directement à une sorte de décentralisation, c'est-à-dire équiper leur municipalité par des systèmes solaires. Mais d'un côté, ils ont sauvé l'institution municipale, c'est-à-dire ont passé d'une heure d'ouverture, une heure par jour de l'institution municipale à une ouverture de 6 heures sur toute la semaine, mais en même temps, ils ont alimenté le dispensaire du village en électricité. Ils ont alimenté également le club des jeunes en électricité et donc un fonctionnement qui a repris d'une manière très, très efficace. Et ça, c'est le fruit d'un travail de la municipalité avec la société civile, etc. Mais ce qu'on voit aussi au niveau international, c'est que les bailleurs de fonds, par exemple, ils peuvent, avec une simple phrase dans les programmes internationaux et les programmes qui financent des projets de développement, il suffit de demander l'implication des municipalités dans la conception de ces programmes nationaux. Tant que les bailleurs de fonds ne le font pas, le gouvernement n'appelle pas les maires pour voir qu'est-ce qu'on peut faire ensemble, etc., etc. Donc, il y a aussi cette responsabilité et il faut que les bailleurs de fonds s'arrêtent de dire on ne peut pas intervenir dans les affaires des pays et c'est je ne sais pas quoi. C'est du blablabla tout ça, en fait. Il suffit de dire dans les programmes internationaux, c'est-à-dire le discours qu'ils tiennent eux-mêmes, ils disent il faut impliquer les femmes. Mais comment? Il faut impliquer la société civile. Mais comment? Si on ne dit pas dans les programmes internationaux offerts à ces pays en voie de développement, il faut absolument impliquer les maires, on n'aura aucun maire dans une commission de travail. Donc ça, c'est notre expérience, si vous voulez. Je suis passé donc de CGLU, n'est-ce pas, Emilia, depuis 27 ans. Hein. Donc on a ouvert ce bureau de représentation au Liban en 1987 et j'ai vu donc la différence entre la théorie qu'on développe et ça on en a besoin, mais aussi comment impliquer et imposer ces théories dans les instances internationales.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Le Chiolini. I think that one of the things that you've mentioned is super relevant, right? The limits of centralization in the case of Lebanon can also be exported to the limits of centralization in the international system, and that's what we're thinking. So thank you for sharing all your whole experience in this. Can we continue with Senor Paulo Guilles, also with the same question? When addressing the renewed structure of governance, what is the purpose of this decision-making table, and what does the new power structure look like? And I wanted to make you also like a specific question in this sense, because the other day I was talking with an expert in migration, and this expert in migration stated that the transformation of the international system will come actually from the migrant people, as they are somehow pushing the same structure of the system, right? Like they move cross borders, they are transnational persons. So how do you see how do you feel that these experiences also in migration can influence or can build the new system of governance?
Hola, buenos días a todas y todos y todes. Les mando un saludo desde Brasilia y desde el Departamento de Migración del gobierno brasileño, del Ministerio de Justicia. Y bueno, agradecer a Emilia, Fátima y a todo el equipo de la CGLU, José, por la invitación. Y decirle que los queremos tener muy presente en el momento que vivimos en Brasil y que es justamente el momento de construcción de la nueva política migratoria brasileña y que dentro de esta nueva política migratoria se prevé el fortalecimiento, la promoción o la concretud de una red nacional de ciudades acogedoras para los migrantes. Yo escuché muy atentamente a todas las reflexiones, las colocaciones, las que me parecen todas muy importantes para pensar hacia el futuro y hacia la construcción de una red que sea cada vez más sólida, pero que también pueda hacer la incidencia para que pueda cambiar paradigmas, ¿no? Muchos de los temas colocados son provocadores y yo quería mencionar solamente la importancia que tenemos que comprender a las ciudades como redes locales, ¿no? Y yo creo que es justamente por eso que la CGLU se compone también de la sociedad civil y de las personas, ¿no?, que habitan a la ciudad. Y dentro del tema de migración, nosotros hemos observado de cómo los cambios que se producen alrededor de las ciudades son capaces también de influenciar a la gobernanza nacional y regional. Y en este sentido puedo dar como ejemplo, yo no sé si hay alguien aquí de São Paulo, por ejemplo, del municipio de São Paulo, pero por ejemplo, la construcción de la política migratoria de la ciudad de São Paulo en los años 2013-2016 coincidió también con la construcción de la Ley Nacional de Migración, ¿no? Y gracias al trabajo y a la perspectiva, ¿no?, de construcción local de la ciudad de São Paulo, fue posible también cambiar la Ley Nacional de Migración, de manera que hoy la Ley Nacional de Migración tiene un artículo, que es el artículo 120, que dice que la política migratoria será coordinada por la Unión, pero con participación de los estados y de los municipios. Yo creo que ahí hablamos de un modelo de gobernanza, ¿no? Entonces, para mí era muy importante traer justamente este ejemplo para decir que sí es posible construir modelos de gobernanza donde los principales actores sean los que tienen recursos, como es, por ejemplo, la Unión, pero también los departamentos, los municipios, la sociedad civil estén presentes, ¿no? Entonces, desde nuestra perspectiva, ¿no?, y aportar, dialogando con las contribuciones, vemos que es necesario construir cada vez más estas alianzas, justamente para un término que es en portugués, no sé si lo voy a saber traducirlo en español, pero engajamiento, ¿no? O sea, que una forma de hacer con que nos comprometamos todos juntos a pensar en los modelos, ¿no? Y también difundir cada vez más las directrices, ¿no? Entonces nosotros en ese momento de construcción de una política nacional, es posible sí pensar gobernanza donde haya directrices para todos los organismos de gobiernos, ¿no? Porque cuando hablamos de las ciudades, hay ciudades de todos los modelos, ciudades grandes, ciudades con muchos recursos, pero también ciudades que son pequeñas. Y yo creo que justamente crear esas directrices nacionales, regionales, puede hacer con que se tenga una difusión mucho más amplia de informaciones, de intercambio de buenas prácticas, de posibilidades de financiamientos y sobre todo de la participación social, ¿no? Y yo justamente terminaría con este punto, ¿no?, para decir que los migrantes son los sujetos de derechos, ¿no? Y son justamente a través de ellos, a través de la promoción de mecanismos de participación social, ya sea en las grandes metrópolis como en las fronteras, ¿no? Yo la próxima semana estaré en la frontera, una frontera de Brasil aquí con los países vecinos, Bolivia, justamente para tratar de estas temáticas, ¿no? De cómo incluir la reflexión que viene desde la frontera, desde los migrantes también para producir los cambios que sean necesarios. Así que desde el Departamento de Migración de Brasil, como coordinador general aquí, y ahora coordinando este proceso de construcción de la nueva política migratoria, no tengo más nada que saludar esta iniciativa y decir de mi felicidad de poder participar, compartir ustedes, y lo queremos recibir a todos para que nos apoyen a construir un modelo de gobernanza, ¿no? Entonces, más que decir qué debemos hacer para el pacto de futuro, les invito también para que nos ayuden a construir nuestro pequeño pacto de futuro de un modelo de gobernanza que puede después también apoyar a todos. Así que muchas gracias y una buena jornada.
Muchísimas gracias, señor Íñiguez. Me uno a lo que plantea e invito a todas las personas que nos están siguiendo a que puedan escribir también sus contribuciones a las preguntas que hacemos en el chat, aunque no puedan participar a viva voz. Muchas gracias por su contribución, porque ha sido muy interesante. Ahora nos movemos y vamos a saludar a Marcela Petrantonio, que es la secretaria de Desarrollo Productivo y Relaciones Internacionales en la ciudad de Tandil, en Argentina. Bueno, muy buenas tardes, bueno, buenos días para usted, entiendo, espero que esté bien. Voy a cambiar de pregunta para poder ir abordando algunas otras cuestiones y yo quería preguntarle para usted cuáles son los nuevos esenciales derechos y servicios públicos que nuestro colectivo, los gobiernos locales y regionales deberían proteger, reforzar y promover en alianza con el conjunto de la sociedad para construir ese nuevo sistema del que estamos hablando.
Bueno, buenos días por aquí. Mira, en estos minutos me gustaría por lo menos dejarles 4 reflexiones. Primero, en principio, una gran felicitación al Secretariado General de CGLU por movilizar estos ejercicios con estas metodologías participativas. Aunque sea obvio, no pasa esto en todas las organizaciones multilaterales y me parece que es importante colocarlo como para que conste en acta, digamos. Puntualmente hay 4 puntos que quería dejar. Primero, toda esta coincidencia que en las distintas intervenciones en este cuarto ejercicio lo hemos visto con mucha visibilidad, que tiene que ver con la crisis del sistema internacional. Digamos, tomemos esta crisis como una oportunidad y como una alternativa que también nos haga revisar a nuestro interior de redes y de organismos multilaterales de ciudades. Entonces, primer comentario, crisis como oportunidad. No voy a ahondar en el diagnóstico porque simplemente decir que desde aquí coincidimos en esa mirada. Segunda reflexión. En definitiva, y lo decía el compañero de Brasil recién, también esta mirada hacia adentro nos tiene que exigir pensar, no dejar a ninguna ciudad atrás. Cuando nosotros bregamos por tener esta silla en el sistema internacional global, con voz, avanzar en tener votos, bueno, ¿quiénes son las ciudades que están sentadas en esa silla? Me parece que seguir profundizando en la heterogeneidad de nuestras ciudades, en entender que no debemos dejar ninguna ciudad atrás, también como colectivo es nuestra obligación. Y ahí también tenemos que trabajar entonces esta pregunta que me decías de los nuevos derechos. El nuevo derecho debe estar pensado para todo ese mundo de ciudades y de gobiernos locales, que en definitiva de eso se tratan nuestras redes, y no dejar a ninguna ciudad atrás. Tercera cuestión, tercera reflexión. Aquí se ha hablado mucho del concepto de poder, de liderazgo y de autoridad. Claramente, y en todos los documentos que CGLU nos deja permanentemente para trabajar, discutir, reflexionar, que yo los invito a que todos y todas los lean, porque son extraordinarios, es el equipo profesional que nos aporta y nos interpela todo el tiempo con esos documentos. Digo, aquí la tercera reflexión tiene que ver con que claramente autoridad no es lo mismo que liderazgo, y nosotros queremos construir estos liderazgos, o este poder a partir de liderazgos claros, liderazgos democráticos, liderazgos respetuosos, liderazgos de proximidad en nuestros territorios. Entonces, cuidado, que no siempre la autoridad significa liderazgo. Y muchas veces un líder sin autoridad realmente lidera una comunidad. Entonces, la tercera reflexión tiene que ver con que qué tipo de liderazgos queremos llevar a este sistema multilateral, tanto de gobiernos nacionales como de nuestros propios, como nuestro propio sistema de gobiernos locales. Y cuarto, y con esto termino los aportes para el debate, para el diálogo, para seguir trabajando, como decía nuestra secretaria general en el inicio de este ejercicio, claramente si nosotros partimos de considerar la crisis como una oportunidad, nuestra necesidad de debatir qué ciudades, este reconocimiento de heterogeneidad de ciudades. Tercero, entender que los liderazgos deben ser esos liderazgos democráticos, los que lleven la voz y voten en estas sillas del sistema multilateral internacional. Claramente, las ciudades intermedias, como la que estoy representando en este momento, las pequeñas ciudades, tienen una gobernanza próxima con la ciudadanía. La ciudadanía está mucho más empoderada porque trabajamos con la ciudadanía desde los gobiernos locales, el responder a las nuevas necesidades, por ejemplo, que tiene una sociedad digital. Hoy no conseguimos empleo si no nos capacitamos en transformación digital. Hoy no conseguimos un empleo genuino, digno, legal. Tampoco conseguimos alimentarnos y conservar nuestra salud si no trabajamos por el desarrollo de alimentación más saludable. Las ciudades pequeñas, las ciudades intermedias, tienen gobernanzas absolutamente co-construidas en un concepto de co-construcción del territorio. Entonces, como último, digamos, último renglón, creo que nos queda también mirarnos hacia adentro, profundizar nuestro propio sistema para que fortalecernos y así realmente llevar una voz y votar siendo representantes de todos los ciudadanos que residimos y ciudadanas en las ciudades, teniendo en cuenta esa gran diversidad. No solamente la diversidad cultural, la diversidad de espacio geográfico, la diversidad vinculada a lo que significan nuestras acciones por el cambio climático, sino la diversidad por los diferentes tipos de gobernanzas que por nuestras dimensiones tenemos. Muchísimas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, señora Novovic. Perdón, señora Petra Antonio. Ha sido súper interesante lo que ha planteado y me surge una dicotomía, ¿no? Porque habla de los nuevos liderazgos que son necesarios para poder implementar todas estas reformas, pero en este sistema en el que estamos, en el que realmente el liderazgo duro, ese liderazgo autoritario, tapa a ese liderazgo que necesitamos. ¿Cómo salimos de esta dicotomía de...? Entonces, bueno, creo que plantea, ¿no?, la democratización del sistema al final, que la única manera de salir de eso es democratizando el sistema, pero ¿cuál es el golpe de fuerza que se tiene que hacer o de dónde nace ese golpe de fuerza? ¿Quién lo tiene que dar para poder avanzar hacia esos modelos de liderazgo mucho más feministas, ¿no? Me gustaría ahora, muchas gracias por compartir con nosotros, y ahora me gustaría también presentar a Alexandra, que bueno, forma parte del Fórum Joven en Madrid. Bueno, estoy contenta de verte, Alexandra. Las dos estamos en el Campus Joven. Les había hablado bien de ti, Elena. Y no voy a hacerte la misma pregunta que le planteaba a Marcela, porque creo que desde tu visión tanto de juventud como de migración puedes quizás aportar una mirada, ¿no?, a lo que sería, en plan, pensar qué necesitamos exigirle al sistema internacional para que este multilateralismo o una gobernanza multinivel de la que estamos hablando permita el éxito de las estrategias de las que hablamos, del Pacto por el Futuro, de estos nuevos modelos de gobernanza que estamos planteando aquí.
Hola, muchas gracias. Yo, por mi parte, contestaré en inglés, si nos importa. Y sobre todo creo que I think key priorities for youth would be importance of inclusive and accessible services, taking into account the intersectional and the intersectional diverse identities and needs of young people. Also, mechanism for meaningful youth participation and engagement would be fundamental, including mutual channels of communications between young people and government actors, with special attention paid to including and creating space of use of young people experiencing multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination and marginalization. Also, accessible information, capacity building, education programs, and funding for youth-led initiatives is fundamental, as many times youth have great ideas, but their voices aren't heard and their ideas aren't funded in order for them to export what they know and what they're feeling. Furthermore, peace and justice, transparent government, and safe spaces, including restorative policing to ensure young people are able to hold stakeholders accountable without repercussions through transparent and effective methods of governance. And lastly, to create space for climate action, uplifting young people's knowledge and roles as leaders. Young people are leaders, and young people have great initiatives and have great voices. In order for them to be heard, young migrants also are not as trusted and are not as heard by stakeholders and government leaders. So their ideas aren't taken into account many times, and people say young people are considered, but many times our voices aren't repercussed in documents that are later published, which is why young voices and young representation and young empowerment is essential in government decisions and stakeholders. Thank you.
Many thanks, Alexandra. Actually, transforming the governance structure means including and listening to the voices of everyone in equal terms, or at least in an equitarian way. So understanding how youth can contribute to this and including us it's fundamental. So thank you so much for your contribution. Now I'm going to introduce to Hannes Lagrelius from the Accessibility Campus, and he's member from the World Blind Union. I'm happy to be here with you, Hannes, again. And yeah, I will ask you more or less the same. What do you think we have to demand to international system to transform, to like allow us to move towards our shared strategy? How's your perspective on this?
Great, thank you so much. Just to make sure, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Great, thank you so much. So actually, when I prepared for today's conversation, I planned to talk about something else, but of course it's related. And I just wanted to, like, otherwise I could go on for 20, 30, even 2 hours around this. But I think from my perspective, I like to quickly share something we have in the pipeline in our collaboration between the World Blind Union and UCLG. But first, when it comes to accessibility, I do want to commend UCLG for the leadership around accessibility, including ensuring that it's cross-cutting the agenda of the municipal movement, the Pact for the Future. Because when we think about it, like whether it's a multilateral system or it's localization, we view accessibility as something which needs to be at the core, right? To facilitate equal and meaningful participation, regardless of the governance level, that accessibility is integrated in a way which can so ensure that diverse voices are at the table, either in the decision-making or informing the decision-making processes, while also ensure that accessibility is truly cutting across strategies, plans, policies, and how we truly create spaces which are authentically inclusive, right? Which allows everyone to live in a livable environment. And building on this, we initiated our next phase of collaboration with UCLG at the retreat this year with a focus on closing the accessibility gap. Because as my colleague from the Accessibility Caucus there, they highlighted, was that wherever we are, we see that the accessibility gap globally is increasing. And to really curb this will help us also to address some of the root causes of inequalities faced by persons with disabilities and intersecting groups. At our heart of our collaboration in localization to close this gap, but also to support increased engagement between local and regional governments and organizations of persons with disabilities. Because we know globally, we know the trends about persons with disabilities and accessibility, and we know that, and I think we can all agree on that accessibility is critical. And this is why we now seek to map practices to also better understand what needs there are and what do we have to do to foster increased engagement between the organized constituency of persons with disabilities and the organized constituency of local and regional governments. And this will truly get us closer to the how-to, because we always discuss why it's critical. So this will help us to address the how-to aspects. And to get us closer to these how-to aspects of accessibility and engagement, what we'll do is that we will undertake a joint mapping exercise with surveys to the respective memberships of organization to really assess the current state of accessibility practices by local and regional governments, better understand how local and regional governments engage with the organized constituency of persons with disabilities, and in turn do the same for our membership, the World Bank Union membership and wider community of organizations of persons with disabilities, to understand, okay, but this is what local and regional government is saying, how you engage, how they engage with you, but what's your perspective on this? So it will be a very mirrored exercise. The surveys we plan to conduct, to roll out during the course of this year, ideally launching them in conjunction with the SDG summit, will also be coupled with other exercises such as dialogues between the organized constituencies. And we envision that this will be the results and findings, including recommendations, will be summarized in a global report ready to be launched at the next UCLG retreat. And I mean, when we talk about accessibility, of course, it relates to how we ensure that governance architecture are truly inclusive and accessible for everyone to contribute so that we can all make the most of the diversity in our communities. Because the exercise I just mentioned will help us to actually gain insights into what works, what doesn't work, and what are the gaps when it comes to inclusion of persons with disabilities and accessibility, and also provide us increased insights around where we are in terms of accessibility. Because frankly, when we review SDG reporting, the inclusion of persons with disabilities and intersecting constituencies, but also the aspects of universal access is so often forgotten. And we need to move forward on this, especially as we now work to what will come after the 2030 agenda. So I will stop there for now, but thank you so much for giving me the floor and for having us all for this fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannes, for your contribution also and for being with us. We're gonna finish now with Francine Melchioretto, who is the program officer from the UN Habitat. And yeah, I will ask you from this perspective, from your perspective, how can local and regional governments and other stakeholders be better involved in decisions at the international level? You are already in the international level, you understand how all these structures work. So I think that your perspective on how can we transform it from within to facilitate the entrance of new voices can be very positive. And also, if we can link this maybe with the construction of peace, how can we facilitate this new democratic global democracy? And if that will prevent escalation of tensions into violence. And somehow, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having us here. So I am representing not only UN Habitat, but the Local 2030 Coalition, which is the UN wide network for SDG localization. So just to give a bit of a context of what we do, because I think that also makes clear how we see the contributions of local and regional governments and the decisions that you're asking at international level. So first and foremost, the Local 2030 Coalition, it was established with a clear objective in mind. We wanted to equip the United Nations with all the tools and mechanisms that will allow us to engage better with local and regional governments, but also with national governments, civil society, academia, youth, private sector. So really all the people. Because what we believe from Local 2030 is that by bringing together a variety of stakeholders, we are gonna be able to foster collaboration, we will be able to incubate innovation, share solutions, also implement strategies that will support local stakeholders in achieving the 2030 agenda. So we really recognize the crucial role of having a collective effort and the Local 2030 Coalition tries to serve as the United Nations platform for this joint action and to bring in integrated solutions that are tailored to the needs of the different actors that we work with and with the different territories. And of course, that in the framework of what we do, the coalition clearly recognizes that local and regional governments, they play a key role, not only in the decisions that we'll be taking at the international level, but of course in the implementation of sustainable development strategy, because when we are discussing this at the international level, we also wanted to hear what are the needs and the aspirations of the communities, how we can drive transformative change from the ground up. And we think that local and regional governments are always well placed to bring this to discussions that we're having. So the way that we work is that by really believing in this collective joint effort, we have a governance structure that includes different actors, and there is a seat for a local and regional government and for an association of local and regional governments. And we are very grateful to have in this role currently the Global Task Force and UCLG as our close partners. And of course, we are honored to have Emilia as one of our steering committee members. So we also count on you to hold us accountable and ensure that the priorities of your constituencies are strongly represented within the Local 2030 Coalition and the United Nations work, because we are approaching the midpoint of our journey towards accomplishing the 2030 agenda. And I think we are all committed to breaking down all the barriers and that allow us to promote collaboration and implement more coherent and integrated action within the UN system. So this is the type of discussions that we want to have at the international arena. So we emphasize a lot the importance of local engagement, especially at the high-level events that the UN organizes, such as the High-Level Political Forum. This year, we also have the first UN Food System Stock-Taking Moment. That will be the SDG Summit and many others leading up to the Summit of the Future and another edition of the World Urban Forum in 2024. So we really hope to use our platform to integrate all the perspectives of local and regional governments. And we see the outcomes of the exercise, such the ones that we are having today, are very important to feed those discussions. So we wanted to work with local and regional governments because we think that without them, we won't be able to define the pathways and the measures and all the policies that we need to achieve the SDGs by 2030. And going back to the last part of your question that you were asking about the construction of peace and how we, by having these types of discussions with governments to try to prevent conflict, this is also part of the joint work that we try to do with the UN system, but also with all the actors, because we believe a lot in conflict prevention. We believed in building resilient communities and developing the local communities. And this is also part of what we like to contributed for the whole discussions of peace prevention. So that there is a whole lack of opportunities for Local 2030 and different topics that we can bring forward to the discussions. So we also like to hear from local and regional governments what are these key points that we should bring to the table. So yeah, I stop here, but thank you a lot for bringing us to the discussion today. And we also look forward to hear how we can use our platform at the UN to bring the local and regional government close to everything that we're organizing towards the SDG Summit. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Francina. It's been, you said something really interesting that I would like our members to think of. You said, we really believe in making decisions together, right? So my question here is, how do we make them believe? How do we make all the big politicians, those that have the big power and have to push forward this reform, believe in the inclusion of local and regional authorities is going to be positive for the stability in the international system, believe that the inclusion and participation of civil society groups, of the different persons of society, including those that today we still do not consider as having full rights, such as migrants. How do we move from not believing in this into this radical democratic international system towards a system in which we can all participate? So, but this is an open question each of you can think of. And now, muchas gracias, Emilia, por dejarme moderar este Ágora. Te devuelvo la palabra para que puedas dar conclusión y, a la sesión.
Pues muchísimas gracias a ti, Viviane, porque como siempre nos interpelas y nos pones preguntas que yo creo que tendremos que ir contestando, empezando por los documentos que van a salir de estas sesiones, pero también como discusiones a definir en próximos pasos. Muchísimas gracias a ti. Now, I am very happy to have with us our Vice President for Latin America, Fernando Grey, the Mayor of Esteban Echevarría, Vicepresidente. Qué gusto tenerle con nosotros. Perdón por haberle ido cambiando de espacio porque usted tenía una agenda ocupada, pero nos alegra muchísimo que se tome el tiempo para estar con nosotros, y yo le diría que casi como reflexión final de estas discusiones, su perspectiva desde Latinoamérica sobre los retos a los que nos enfrentamos y la necesidad de repensar la gobernanza. Muchísimas gracias de nuevo, vicepresidente. Un gusto tenerle.
Bueno, muy buenas tardes, colegas. Como siempre, un especial agradecimiento para Emilia por esta convocatoria y a todo el equipo del secretariado de CGLU. Realmente es un honor poder compartir con todos y todas ustedes este encuentro de co-construcción y diálogo para modelar colectivamente nuestra visión de futuro y continuar trabajando en una agenda conjunta para potenciarnos desde nuestra experiencia como gobiernos locales y regionales. Deseo felicitar a todo el equipo de este espacio en el que el liderazgo político de CGLU busca alcanzar conclusiones reales y tangibles a través de consultas centradas en la recuperación de los bienes comunes, la redefinición de las finanzas y la economía, la recuperación de la confianza y la reconstrucción de la arquitectura de la gobernanza. Sin duda alguna, activar este mecanismo contribuye significativamente al despliegue del Pacto para el Futuro. Tal como indica CGLU, la renovación de la gobernanza debe hacer frente a situaciones que han provocado el aumento de las desigualdades, no solo dentro de los países, sino entre ellos a raíz de la pandemia del COVID-19. En virtud de ello, el aumento de la pobreza y la pérdida masiva de empleos e ingresos exigen mecanismos renovados de tomas de decisiones en los que todas las partes interesadas participen para garantizar el cumplimiento de los objetivos. Quisiera comenzar por mencionar un primer eje medular que nos atraviesa como movimiento municipalista. La renovación de nuestro contrato social solo puede cumplirse si y solo si nace del protagonismo muy importante y fundamental de las mujeres. En este sentido, nos preguntamos, ¿cuáles son los nuevos derechos y servicios públicos esenciales que nuestro colectivo debe proteger, reforzar y promover en alianza con el conjunto de la sociedad? Desde Latinoamérica, trabajamos para contribuir en el aporte de nuestra organización, que se brindará en la cumbre de los ODS en el próximo septiembre y en la cumbre del futuro en 2024 como promotora de cambio, sostenibilidad y colectivismo. Amigas y amigos, si nos proponemos visibilizar nuestras ciudades para formar parte de la agenda global, debemos entonces ejercitar la escucha de nuestras ciudades, juventudes que sean protagonismo de la toma de decisiones a nivel local, garantizar una arquitectura democrática y horizontal debe ser la prioridad de los albores en este nuevo contrato social que nos hemos propuesto. Asimismo, nos preguntamos qué apoyos y transformaciones debemos exigir al sistema internacional para que el multilateralismo del futuro permita el éxito de nuestra estrategia compartida. A la luz de la agenda común que nos exige actualizar nuestros acuerdos de gobernanza, no solo debemos cumplirla y dar cuenta de ello, sino que debemos desplegar una ingeniería de gobernanza socialmente sensible y proactiva, y para ello todas las esferas gubernamentales deben velar por las demandas de la ciudadanía de hoy y de las próximas generaciones. Tenemos que anticiparnos, evaluar los escenarios y ofrecer alternativas sostenibles para posibles desafíos del futuro. En virtud de esta premisa, el presente nos encuentra trabajando para potenciar la participación y la agenda de una sociedad civil con conciencia crítica y capacidad de acción para contribuir con su comunidad. Los retos que debemos enfrentar en América Latina ante el endeudamiento y la desigualdad potencian nuestro compromiso para levantar ciudades más sustentables, resilientes e igualitarias. Y pese a ciertos intentos de desestabilización de la democracia en el último año, los gobiernos locales debemos redoblar nuestros esfuerzos para vigorizar las instituciones democráticas y alertar la participación de una ciudadanía que sea capaz de transformarse en agente de cambio y de este modo robustecer los órganos de las democracias latinoamericanas. Desde los gobiernos subnacionales debemos solicitar mayor participación en las instancias globales y regionales de gobernanza, como OCDE, Unión Europea, ONU, Mercosur, G20, entre otros, y sobre los organismos de financiamiento y regulación del comercio internacional, como FMI, BIRF, BID, CAP, OMC. En esta nueva arquitectura de gobernanza se construye a partir de una sociedad informada, comprometida y que exija rendición de cuentas, pero también sea responsable de la vida democrática. De esta forma, nuestra voz en las agendas globales visibilizará realmente las demandas y las realidades de nuestras comunidades. Sin embargo, para que esto ocurra, nuestro liderazgo debe ser inclusivo, representativo y con una genuina perspectiva de género para propiciar una cultura verdaderamente democrática. Finalmente, ¿cómo pueden los gobiernos locales y regionales y otras partes interesadas participar mejor en las decisiones a nivel internacional para evitar que las tensiones se conviertan en violencia? Tal y como nos lo proponemos en Esteban Echeverría, llevamos adelante políticas gubernamentales que buscan equilibrar las demandas actuales con las necesidades a largo plazo y de nuestro entorno. Entonces, mientras fortalecemos nuestros sistemas de prevención y gestión de riesgos para asegurar la inmediatez de un presente más seguro que propicie una vida saludable y en armonía, alentamos, por su parte, el acceso igualitario a la información y a la tecnología para nuestras juventudes a través de un programa permanente de distribución de netbooks y otros dispositivos en las escuelas de nuestro distrito. Así, buscamos contribuir al desarrollo equitativo de nuevas generaciones participativas, informadas y con conciencia crítica, y de esta forma la voz de nuestros jóvenes protagonizará la agenda local. Por otro lado, abrazamos el liderazgo de las mujeres en las diversas esferas gubernamentales para garantizar una ciudadanía cada vez más justa y equitativa. Por este motivo, la toma de decisión en nuestro municipio es cada vez más igualitaria de la mano de las mujeres en puestos claves para desarrollar políticas públicas que potencien la reafirmación de derechos, la sustentabilidad, la transparencia, la salud fiscal y la participación democrática. En el marco del Pacto para el Futuro de la Humanidad, el rol de los gobiernos locales es fundamental para hallar herramientas efectivas que nos permitan responder a los nuevos desafíos y garantizar el derecho a vivir en ciudades abiertas, pacíficas y habitables. Sin duda, las ciudades debemos ser resilientes y desarrollar la capacidad de salvaguardar todo el ecosistema de instituciones democráticas como parte de un megaproyecto de sostenibilidad para el planeta, las personas y el gobierno. Para finalizar, como representante de las voces de Latinoamérica, reafirmo nuestro más profundo compromiso con el Pacto para el Futuro, para asegurar un mundo más igualitario, justo e inclusivo en la humanidad, para que la humanidad viva en paz, la sociedad civil sea activa del liderazgo político y la biodiversidad y el entorno sean respetados. Caminar hacia una gobernanza multinivel, dinámica y horizontal es contribuir a la democracia y vigorizar el multilateralismo, y la integración es defender un mundo más pacífico y sustentable. De este modo, estamos diseñando nuestra hoja de ruta en la región. Muchas gracias, Emilia, y muchas gracias a todos y todas.
No, muchísimas gracias a usted, vicepresidente, porque realmente le ha puesto el broche final a nuestra discusión, enmarcando desde una perspectiva política, que es la que le toca esa visión que todos defendemos, ¿no? Muchísimas gracias por también recoger muchos puntos que han ido saliendo y por parte de nuestros socios en el debate, como la necesidad de anticipación, por supuesto, la inclusión de todas y todos, ¿no? Se lo agradezco de verdad muchísimo y creo que no había manera mejor de cerrar ya esta discusión, que tenemos que continuar, ¿no?, en el marco de nuestro Buró Ejecutivo, porque tiene que marcar las pautas de nuestro trabajo completo, pero también de nuestro concreto, quiero decir, y también el de la visión general. Colleagues, I'm going now to close the session, sharing with you the work that we have done while we were discussing through our mural. We will do this very quickly, Ana, because we are really late, but Ana Calvete is going to run us through it. Wow, this has been a very rich session, Ana. So I don't know how we are doing. I guess we are doing well. How is our square going?
I think it looks beautiful, Emilia. We've been putting a lot of effort into it, and yeah, I'll try to be short. So thank you, everyone, for this extensive and great discussion, which has given us a lot of inputs to move forward. So as introduced at the beginning of the session, we've been working on the completion of this Ludo since last week. And very importantly, we encourage you all to join the mural as well and complete it in the coming days with new ideas, as we want to ensure that this is truly a co-creation exercise. So as Emilia said, this Ludo includes 4 colored squares, one for each of the entry points of the Pact for the Future: commons, economy and finance, trust, and finally today, governance. And at the center, of course, of this Ludo, the Pact, which is where we are heading to with these important discussions. So for each color square, we have been including all components of the methodology that my colleague Jose described at the beginning of the session. For today, firstly, in the setting the scene section, we find ideas shared by UCLG Secretary General Emilia Saiz, along with some facts and challenges collected from the Goal 6 report. We have also captured your reactions through the Mentimeter questions. In point 3, we can see the main entry points highlighted by keynote speakers Daniel Perel and Pefi Kingi. We then have the key contributions by Philip Roth, Lucy Slack, Asier Arambarri, and Fernando Gray, as well as the in-focus contribution by Karishma Raju. And finally, we've been creating several stickers based on the comments you have made in the Agora and clustered them around the 4 questions that were proposed at the beginning of the process. So, for example, if we talk about the new essentials, about the rights, Hannes Lagrelius was mentioning the need to close the accessibility gap. And he said that there are tools for that they are known and they just need to be implemented. Related to this, also thinking of concrete solutions for the question of what we require from the international system. Beshir Odemi was mentioning the need for international organizations and donors not only to invite national governments to bring energies on board, but rather to impose that. Also, Emilia Said was saying at the beginning that the HLPF needs to recognize instruments like VLRs and VSRs as key. And I have to say that the 2030 agenda has come up quite often in these conversations. And Francine Melchioreto was mentioning the local 2030 coalition also, and we believe that this will contribute to strengthening this arena where decisions are jointly taken. Paulo Illes imagines a new governance architecture where cities are conceived as local networks capable of triggering change at national level. Of course, this also entails recognizing migrants as subjects of law, and this connects very well to what we were saying yesterday in the trust session about who has the ability to participate in policy making, who has the knowledge. And also defining roles. Marcela Petrantonio was reminding us that the leaderships need to be clear, democratic, respectful, of proximity. So all of this and more is included in the Ludo. We do not want to forget any input you gave us today in order to deploy our pact for the future. And as said, again, this mural has been already shared with you, and we hope you will continue involved in this co-production process. And this
Thank you very much, Anna. I mean, the thing is, it looks so good, it looks so beautiful that people might be scared to mess it up. Don't worry, you can do that. And we will make sure that it still looks good and easy to read for everyone. We want this to be a one-place stop to get an idea of where our discussions have been going, and at the same time construct this city for the future that connects the local and the global. So thank you very much for that presentation and for summing up some of the key takeaways. As next steps, I would say, and taking up the challenges that have been coming up in the debate around changing leadership, changing priorities, changing models, and redefining stakeholders' knowledge and skills. What we are going to do is we will be producing a vision document that will summarize the discussions that we have had today. So we will have 4 vision documents in total. We will have a final future envisioning exercise of this edition that will be taken live to the Executive Bureau. So it will be the full Executive Bureau of UCLG meeting in Brussels, doing an exercise like this one, but connecting all the entry points. And then towards the end of the year, we will be preparing an integrated exercise. Between now and the end of the year, we are going to make sure that we identify the actions that we can already do under each of the entry points. So this is a process which is meant to be medium term. You know, we are trying to get to the summit for the future, but that will have immediate effect in our work program in terms of prioritization, and it will shape the discussions of our medium term and longer term tactic, because the strategy is the pact for the future. I didn't expect this conversation to be so interesting. My fault. You always get to surprise me. Thank you, everybody, for your inputs. We will see each other again. Follow us in social media so that you know what is happening, but we will contact you directly as well as participants of this exercise. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, team. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.